Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my findings after some months of research trying to determine which is the best third-party fast aperture standard zoom for Fuji X mount. Now, up for consideration here today are two non-Fuji lenses. This is the Sigma 18-50mm F2.8 DN lens on my right, and then the Tamron 17-70mm F2.8 VC lens here on my left. Now, obviously also worthy of consideration, particularly if you're wanting to work on the premium end of the space, is Fuji's own 16-55mm F2.8. It does run considerably more expensive than either one of these lenses, but obviously also has some strengths to offset that. It's a little bit more premium in build and design, and I probably will do a little bit of a revisiting in the future. For one thing, I want to see how that works on the 40 megapixel sensor of my X-H2. Now, I've been doing Fuji reviews for years at this point, but it was only in 2023 that I bought my first Fuji camera. I'd always been using those that had been loaned to me before. And so as a byproduct, when I reviewed the X-H2, I felt like it was the camera that checked enough boxes for me personally that I would like to own one. And thus, I had to start considering about having a bit of a Fuji kit myself to actually have lenses to use on the camera. And so that began this kind of journey of exploration, trying to determine which of these lenses kind of made more sense for me. As I explored them, I reviewed them both in 2023, and both of them have strengths that we're going to see today. Both of them have some weaknesses.
Today's episode is brought to you by Phantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Phantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.phantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So let's talk about a couple of the shared strengths between the two lenses. They both have a maximum aperture of f2.8 throughout their respective zoom ranges. That's very useful, and it is one advantage over the 18 to 50 millimeter OIS lens coming from Fuji, which runs roughly the same as these when it comes to the price point, falling kind of right in between them. And so that is one advantage that they both have. They both are significantly cheaper than what the Fuji 16 to 55 millimeter is, and so that is probably a primary reason why a lot of people might consider them over the Fuji. There's a little bit more of an advantage for the Sigma in the regards of also being much, much smaller and lighter. And we'll get to that in just a moment. So we've discussed a few common strengths. How about a couple of common weaknesses? Both of these lenses have no aperture ring or on-lens controls, and so the Fuji options will have an aperture ring, so that's one thing that both of these are missing. The other thing I noticed on both of them when testing the zooming in and out while shooting video, I noticed that both of them did some really obvious and bad warping, and also some very noticeable focus adjustments during that video zoom. So some shared weaknesses, one basically as bad as the other. So let's talk about some reasons to choose the Sigma that I have found as I have been researching. First of all, the Sigma is very obviously much, much smaller. These lenses don't even hardly seem like the same class of lens. And frankly, the Sigma seems a whole lot more like an APS-C zoom than what the Tamron does, which seems like a not even small full frame zoom. So the Sigma is 61.6 millimeters or 2.4 inches in diameter. The Tamron is 3.28 inches or 83.3 millimeters in diameter. They're really different in length, the Sigma being only 76.8 millimeters or 3 inches in length, whereas the Tamron is 106 millimeters or 4.17 inches in overall length. So obviously if you're wanting to travel compact and you have maybe a compact bag you're wanting to travel with, The Sigma is going to fit in much more spaces and is a much smaller lens carry. Similarly, it is much lighter. It is only 285 grams or 10 ounces compared to 523 grams or 18 ounces for the Tamron. And by the way, the Fuji lens is heavier still, a little bit more premium build, but also it's a fairly chunky and substantial lens itself. Now, price-wise is a third area of win for Sigma. It is only $549 at retail compared to $799 for the Tamron. And so that's a fairly significant difference of about $250 in price between the two. I found that at wide apertures that the Sigma showed a little bit better flare resistance. Both of these lenses aren't perfect when it comes to flare resistance, but the Sigma felt like it was just a little bit better. The Sigma also has the opportunity of unlocking higher magnification. In fact, here you can see that it has a higher magnification both on the telephoto end, but more importantly on the wide end, where it hits a maximum magnification of 0.36 times. Now, that's not always entirely useful because you have to get very close to your subject to achieve that. But even on the telephoto end, it has a little bit better magnification. The Tamron, the maximum you can achieve is 0.21 times. So the Sigma has some significant advantage there. I also found when doing my chart test and shooting the lenses side by side that the Sigma has a slightly sharper center and mid-frame performance, both wide angle and then through the middle of the zoom range up until the telephoto end. And so a little bit stronger performance there. Now, when I talk about some of these optical differences, I will demonstrate them in detail if you want the breakdown at the end of the video. So stay tuned for that if you want the deep dive into the optics. I also found that it had slightly better telephoto performance, wide open, fairly close in the center and mid frame, but actually a little bit better in the corners, which was kind of a reversal of what we'll see otherwise. It also exhibited slightly lower vignette. And when it comes to the autofocus side of things, I found that the Sigma focused faster and quieter. You can see in these back-to-back focus tests that there's just less pulsing, as the Tamron pulses a little bit more as it locks onto the subject. The Sigma was just kind of smoother going back and forth in this, and it was also quieter in operation. Not that either of them has a lot of focus sounds, but the Tamron is fairly clattery when it comes to the aperture blades opening and closing during focus, and so you hear a little bit of clatter from that. So the Sigma was quieter as well as being a little bit faster and more confident. I also found during the focus pulls on the video side of things that there was less visible stepping, and so the focus pulls were just a little bit smoother and more confident. Now, when I went to something like doing my hand test, in that case, I didn't really see a radical difference between the two lenses. Autofocus was pretty good actually from both of those in the transition from the hand to the eye and vice versa. And so overall, you can see that they perform quite well there. But I would give the autofocus edge in general to Sigma because it does have some significant advantages in a few areas that the Tamron did not exhibit. So how about some reasons to choose the Tamron? Now, obviously, Tamron went with a much larger lens for the simple fact that they kind of gave you everything. This is a bigger zoom range with that large maximum aperture than what you're seeing on any of the competing lenses. So to go all the way from 17 to 70 millimeters means that you're going to get a little bit more width on the wide angle of things. You can see from this comparison shot that there is a difference. It's not radically obvious in the shot, but you can see a much more noticeable difference if we zoom into the telephoto range. So let's give it 2 points here because it gets both extra width on the wide angle, but it also gets more telephoto zoom. And so that gives it just an all-around advantage if your priority is to get as many focal lengths as possible covered in one lens. The Tamron does that while keeping that constant maximum aperture of f2.8, which is impressive, and it's the reason why the lens is so big. The lens also comes with Tamron's VC, vibration compensation, which is their optical stabilization system, whereas the Sigma does not. By the way, neither does the Fuji 16-55mm. So if you happen to be shooting with one of Fuji's bodies that doesn't have in-body image stabilization, that's going to be a really obvious difference between the two. Now, I did my test on my Fuji X-H2, which does have effective in-body image stabilization. So frankly, I didn't really notice much of a difference between the two when it came to those things because of the good in-body stabilization. But if you happen to be shooting on one of Fuji's mini bodies that doesn't have stabilization, that's going to be a huge advantage for the Tamron, particularly if you want to do some handheld video capture. The Tamron has better weather sealing. It doesn't just have a rear gasket, but it has seal points at the rings and up to the front, fluorine coating on the front element. And so it has a more thorough weather sealing throughout, whereas the Sigma has only a weather sealing gasket just at the lens mount, no internal seals. And so that is an area where it is set apart and has a little bit more of an upscale design element there. It also exhibits lower chromatic aberrations, particularly of the fringing variety. Not that either of these lenses is terrible, but I did notice doing a lot of side-by-side comparisons, and as you can see in this example, the Sigma is definitely showing some fringing, whereas the Tamron stays almost perfectly neutral, and so its control of chromatic aberrations is a definite strength for the lens. I also found that up until the extreme telephoto end, that the Tamron had obviously sharper corners when I did side-by-side comparisons. Although the Tamron goes wider than what the Sigma does, surprisingly, it is the one that has the lower levels of distortion. And so another win for Tamron there is that it does control distortion throughout the zoom range, but particularly on the wide end, better than what the Sigma does. And finally, because I would say that the quality of the bokeh is similar across the two lenses, but the Tamron certainly has the capability of producing more of it, for the simple reason that it has that extra 20 millimeters of focal length. So at a variety of distances, it's going to be able to provide more separation from the subject as you tap into beyond the 50 millimeters range. And so that obviously is going to make it a little bit more advantageous, particularly if you're shooting portraiture or things like that, where you're wanting to separate your subject from a background. So in conclusion, both of these lenses exhibit a really radically different approach to the standard zoom formula. It's obviously that in this case, often, you have two lenses that are very similar in a lot of details. That's not the case here at all. So Sigma has chosen a very different formula than what Tamron has here. And I think that what lens is going to be best for you really depends on what category of the market you fit into. And so if your idea of traveling with APS-C and you bought into APS-C to stay nice and compact, the Sigma is the really obvious choice there. I would argue that it is the better size match for most APS-C cameras, and really including my X-H2, which is about the largest of Fuji's bodies. And so in this case, I would say that it is the more natural pairing for most of Fuji's cameras. And if you're looking for a general purpose standard zoom that is a nice fit, maybe you want to travel with the lens, obviously go for the Sigma. It is the compact kit is a nice travel option for that reason. Tamron has obviously gone for maximum utility, the biggest zoom range, plus having that image stabilization built in. So I would say buy the Tamron if, number one, you don't have in-body image stabilization in your body, your camera body, and you don't intend to upgrade to one of Fuji's cameras that has that anytime in the near future, or if your priority includes maybe doing portraiture or weddings where you're going to be able to maximize the telephoto end of the zoom range a little bit more, and you value that versatility, maybe even for shooting events to where in lower light conditions you don't have to stop at 50 millimeters, but you have that additional 20 millimeters of reach, which can be a serious difference maker. Both of these lenses do have value, and frankly, when it comes to the optical performance, there's not really a big standout from one to the other. They both have some give and take, some strengths and weaknesses there. And so I think that at the end of the day, you need to buy which lens suits your actual typical priorities and needs. And because they are such radically different lenses in terms of size, I think that makes it a pretty obvious choice for you. Now, if you want more information on either one of these lenses, in the description below, I do have links to my full reviews on both of them, along with buying links if you've already made your choice. But if you want a deeper dive into how they compare optically, stay with me as we dive into the optical performance and how they come out head to head.
Okay, for the sake of consistency across these comparisons, I'm going to keep the Sigma on the left. The Tamron is going to be on the right. We'll start by taking a look here at our vignette and distortion. You can see that there is a significant amount of barrel distortion on the Sigma at 18 millimeters. The Tamron also has some barrel distortion, but you can see it is a much milder amount, and thus the original framing was tighter because there's extra room that's left on the Sigma to correct for that distortion. Correcting the Sigma took a plus 24, very significant amount to correct for that distortion manually, and you can see that vignette was a plus 92, so I had to move the slider most of the way. By comparison, the Tamron only required a plus 6, though you can see it's a little bit of a complex pattern, so it didn't perfectly correct it, but removing the main body of the distortion manually took a plus 6. Whereas the vignette, I had to max out the sliders at plus 100, so a little bit more vignette on the Tamron versus the Sigma. Now, if we take a look at this comparison here, we can see that if we zoom in and look at our focal point here on this old camera, then we're looking towards this defocused area, you can see that there is some significantly more amount of green fringing on the various textures for the Sigma versus the Tamron. And so that's an area where the Tamron certainly gets the win. You can also see something similar on my chart here, that if you look at the results of the Sigma on the left, there is significantly more fringing as we transition out of focus. So taking another look at the framing here on the left, you can see there's a little bit more showing on the Tamron versus the Sigma. Down here along the bottom of the tub, you can see that there's more that's present there on the Tamron. If you look at the towel, more present on the Tamron. And if you look up here at the ceiling, there's a little bit more of a transition between the top of this and the top of the frame. But you'll probably also agree that this is fairly minuscule, and if I didn't point out those areas, probably the average layperson wouldn't notice the difference. The difference in magnification on the telephoto end, though, is much more obvious, and you can see looking at the right that the Tamron is showing a much more magnified image in this portion of the, well, in all portions of the frame, but particularly here, this kind of stands out. And you can see looking at here that the decoration is not even completely in frame, whereas there's lots of empty space before you even get to that decoration on the Sigma. So that's our primary difference in our framing. Now, obviously, bokeh is somewhat subjective. I've done my best to equate framing here as much as possible, trying to make things equal. It's a little bit hard to do because the way that each one of these lenses registers focal length is not identical. And so you can see there is a few millimeter difference between the two. But if we look towards the defocused areas here, you can see that the Tamron is exhibiting just a little bit more bokeh there. And the other issue that I would say makes the Tamron just a little bit better is the fact that there is some fringing in the bokeh highlights, specular highlights from the Sigma that are missing from the Tamron. At the same time, however, the Tamron is showing some concentric rings here. You can even make out in this image that you're not seeing the same way on the Sigma. So a little bit of give and take there. Again, it's not like one of them is just amazingly creamy and the other is terrible. They're really not all that different. Now, if we do a comparison at 18 millimeters versus 17 millimeters, so on the wide end, I'm going to show you these results at 200% magnification, and this is a 40 megapixel body. You can see in the center of the frame that the Sigma definitely has an advantage here. There's just more contrast and detail in the various textures here, more information there. If we move to the mid-frame area, you can see that that advantage remains, and the Sigma definitely looks sharper in the mid-frame. Popping down to the corner, however, and the opposite becomes true, and the Tamron has better clarity and more detail there, and that's true if we look here over on the left side as well. You can see the Tamron continues to look better and very obviously better here in this down in this corner. Now, what's also interesting to me is that really these results stay quite constant if you stop the lens down. Now, I would say in the center of the frame, the difference is not as noticeable, but it still does favor the Sigma that has a little bit better clarity, a little bit better contrast. In the mid-frame, results are more similar now, and I would say it's here that Tamron has made the largest strides, and it is just as good, maybe even arguably a hair better than what the Sigma is. Down in the corners, obviously the difference is not as pronounced here now as what it was wide open, but you can still see that Tamron is better overall there. Looking at this zone, they're close, but I would favor Tamron, and off into the corner, it's still, fairly obviously the Tamron that is the winner there. Looking at the mid-frame up here, the results are very similar, but I would favor Tamron. So I will say this, that maybe Tamron has a slight more capacity for improvement when stopped down than what does the Sigma. So if we grab a point in the middle of the zoom range, and of course that's not identical with both of these because there's more zoom on the Tamron, but roughly the center of the zoom range, and we pop in again here at f2.8, we can see that the mid-frame results are actually quite similar. Contrast is very, very similar. Amount of detail is very similar. Looking at the mid-frame results, again, very, very similar. Slightly more maybe for the Sigma, but not a significant advantage. And once again, the Tamron retains the ability to have better corner performance. So kind of your takeaway there is how important are corners to you, because if they are important to you, if you're thinking about landscape photography, the Tamron might be just a little bit better because it is a little more consistent in its sharpness across the frame. As on the wide end, stopping the lenses down doesn't make a radical difference. The Sigma continues to look a little bit better in the center of the frame. The mid-frame results still slightly favor the Sigma. Not a big difference, but a little bit one there. And the corners are looking much better for the Sigma, but the Tamron's corners are looking really quite fantastic. And so that is definitely the strongest corner performance we've seen. Over in this zone, I slightly favor the Tamron, and down into the corner, again, it's Tamron there, moving up. Very, very slightly Tamron, and then in this upper left corner as well, you'll see that the Tamron result looks a little bit better. Now, if we jump to the telephoto ends of these zoom lenses, we're going to find that in the center of the frame, there's not a whole lot to distinguish these two. They look very, very similar. The mid-frame, we can see that they're similar, but I think there's just a little bit better contrast for the Tamron. Now, ironically here, it's the Sigma that is actually a little bit better in the corner at the telephoto end versus the Tamron, kind of a reversal of what we saw everywhere else. And so that's actually true on both sides of the frame, even if we look up here towards the corner. And as before, stopping down to f5.6 doesn't really change the calculus very much. We can see that both lenses look good, though I do think that there is a little bit more improvement for Tamron than what there is for Sigma, but the corners are still a little bit better for the Sigma, and that's true if you look on all the different areas of the frame that we have looked. And so there's a fairly consistent performance there across the frame. Now, one area in the discussion of flare resistance that didn't make it into the previous portion is that I also slightly favor the Sunstar result from the Tamron. The Sigma has a lower blade count, 7 blades, whereas the Tamron has a higher 9 blade count. So as you can see, that results in just a little bit more interesting sunburst or Sunstar effect with a little bit more defined rays there. And so I do favor that. And so at the end of the day, there is some give and take between both of these lenses, some wins, some losses, and hopefully this gives you a better sense of which one performs more to your taste.
Thank you for sticking around to the end. As always, have a great day and let the light in.